Welcome to another episode of Pit Lane Parley.
And welcome to the latest episode of Pit Lane Parley. My name is Matt Hickey. We got host Mike and Jess with us for our second annual fan night. Really happy we're doing this again. It worked really well last time. And on the show, we're going to have 5 guests join us, and we're just going to talk about various segments and kind of turn the keys over to them to talk for a little bit and discuss whatever topic they're bringing on the show. So we're really excited. First up, we have Christian Denevsky, who is a Team Pit Lane member. We really appreciate all of his support and his great insights in our group chat that we're going on. Christian, how you doing? And how did you get into IndyCar as a fan?
Hey, how's it going? I'm doing well myself. So I was always a racing fan growing up. My dad got me into it. He came from Europe, so we were really a Formula One family for a while there. And then we went to the races there at the Speedway. And then once they left, we kind of had this this gap period where we had to bridge. And one year we went to the race at Kentucky, and I fell in love ever since then. I mean, the speed and the close proximity of the racing got my blood pumping. It's a day I'll never forget.
And kind of quick, just throw you on the spot. Do you think IndyCar will ever go back to Kentucky, or is that kind of a lost cause?
If you're asking me for my personal opinion, just out of I don't know, my own pleasure, I would love for them to go back, but I don't foresee that happening. You know, the management at IndyCar is always pushing that they're only interested in tracks that are interested in them, and that make financial sense and are viable for long-term success. And unfortunately, I don't think Kentucky is really in a position to provide that. I would love for that to change. And if they one day announce they're going back, I'll be the first one to get the tickets.
Awesome. All right. So what's the topic that you wanted to discuss with us today?
So I wanted to bring up and touch on the championship point system. I want to preface this by saying that I have no overglaring issues with it, apart from I think maybe double points could be done away with. But I know there's been some discussion mostly about double points, but just about exploring how the championship might look if we looked at it from a different lens through different point systems. So what I've done is I've gone back on the 2019 championship, and I've recalculated the points minus the bonus points. I was too lazy to do that, but based on the kart point system, and kind of taking a look at kind of how it shakes up from reverting back to that system.
Yeah, I saw your tweets about it a couple of weeks ago, I think, and it looked really interesting. So I'll let you. What would be the top 5 for, I don't know if you looked at 2019 or what years you looked at, but I'm curious to see what your data showed.
Yeah, so I just did it based on 2019, but the 2019 final standings as the point system stands today was Newgarden, Pagenaud, Rossi, Dixon, Power were the top 5. While based on the kart system, it's the same top 5. You notice that Pagenaud drops down to 4th place, and Rossi moves up to 2nd, and Dixon to 3rd, which I think is a bit more indicative of the season that Pagenaud had. By no means was it, a bad season. He was very consistent in the top 10 most races, but he had the 3 wins. Obviously, the Indy 500 is a huge one, and the 4th podium at Pocono. But aside from that, he really stayed around 5th to 10th place. So I think a 4th place finish as opposed to 2nd was probably a bit more fitting for the season he had. And Rossi and Dixon, how they had, they were more consistent in the top 5 and had more podiums. I think that showing deserves them 2nd and 3rd in the championship as opposed to Pagenaud.
I have one more question before Jess or Matt jumps in. For those who might not remember the old scoring system, what was the scoring system for the top 5 points that you went off of?
I would honestly have to bring that up for you. I don't know it exactly off the top of my head, but it was something like the top 12 points, top 12 finishers got points, and anybody outside the top 12 didn't, whereas that's different from today where everybody gets points. And I believe top 5 was something along the lines of 20 for the winner, and 15 12, 10, 8 or something along those lines.
I think it's 20, 16, 14, 12, 10, if I remember correctly.
There you
go. I mean, I'm just like him. In the past, I would do the same thing. I would take a year's results and convert it into card point systems too. So, Christian, you're not alone. I've done it before too.
So, out of curiosity, do you think that if they converted back to that point system, but added points for people who finish lower than 12, do you think that would be okay, or do you only want the top 12 to get points?
So the one thing I actually do really like about the current point system is it kind of encourages people never to give up on a race. So if we look back, for example, at Iowa in 2015 with Scott Dixon, I don't remember what the issue he had, but he had some issue with the car. And, the guys in the garage scrambled together, got the car ready, got it back out, and he was able to jump a few positions and gain some points there. So, to a normal, just casual watcher, they're not going to really know what's going on. Like, they're going to ask, well, why is he doing that? But, to all of us race fans, we know exactly what's happening, and he gained those extra points. And then fast forward to Sonoma at the end of the year, he wins a championship on a tiebreaker. And you can look back to Iowa, how they got the car back out there and were able to get some points, even though it was a lower finishing position. So that's one thing I do like about the current point system, that if it's possible to integrate it back, would be interesting.
I agree. I feel like everybody should get some sort of points. And like you said, if you can get back out and gain a couple more positions, it can make or break your season. So I do like that aspect of the current point system.
And then, so doing your research, obviously you settled on the kart point system that was really popular in the late 80s and then in the 90s. Did you at all consider maybe looking at, and I know this is kind of absurd, but the old USAC pointing scoring system where if it was like a 500-mile race, you get 6 million points. And if it was like a 400-mile race, you got 3.5 million points for first. And, I always thought that was hard to follow. But did you all analyze, that scoring system, and then actually Champ Car increase the points? So like first place would get 30 and second would get some like 27 or something. Were you firmly entrenched on the kart point system as what you analyze as the best, quote unquote?
So I didn't necessarily do something to like optimize it one way or the other. But I just kind of picked the kart system because I knew that was like a big one, obviously. And then I also did it off the Formula One point system just for fun. So no, I haven't explored those other ones, but you've given me some action items. So I'll get to those and come back to you with those.
All right. Well, the USAC one's a little hard to follow, so I wish you luck.
Yeah, I expect a book report due in 2 weeks. I have one more question here, and this is more just your opinion. And I know we discussed this on the show. I think it was somewhat recently. If you were to keep double points, would you keep it at just Indy, both Indy and the finale, or would you get rid of it altogether?
I think I would get rid of it altogether. I understand the importance of weighting the 500 as an important race. But I think there's other aspects of the event that do that for the 500. I think it's a bit unfair to some people who, like, if you have one bad race, right, and you pick any of the other 15 races, you're losing one race worth of points. But if it just happens to come at Indy or Laguna, and it's circumstances that aren't out of your hands, that seems a bit unfair to me. So I would like to see it just be done away with altogether. But I also do understand the motives behind it.
If
Awesome.
you had your way, would you go back to the old point system, like entirely, or would you create a totally new point system? What kind of ideal point system do you have in your mind?
I don't really have any overglaring issues with the current point system. Double points isn't something that keeps me up at night, but if they come to a point where they say, hey, we're going to do away with it, I think that'd be good for the series. But, if anything, maybe a hybrid of the two, because like we mentioned, I do enjoy the fact that, people can get a few extra points, from the bad races that they have, and it could potentially affect the championship at the end. So I think that's a pretty interesting aspect of it.
Awesome. We really appreciate you coming on the show. Excellent first guest. Loved the topic. It was a really good insight from you. So Christian, again, thanks so much for listening every week, for being a Team Pit Lane member. We really appreciate it, and hope to see you at a track this year.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks so much for having me on. It's been a blast.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Thanks, man.
And up next, we got Andy Jones, who is on Twitter at AndyJones6704. Andy, thanks so much for joining us on Fan Night here and for submitting a bunch of fan questions the last couple of weeks. We really appreciate that. Just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into racing.
Oh, yeah. I live here in Indiana, so racing the Indy 500 has kind of always been something in my life. My family started going in the 60s. My grandpa with my mom and my aunt and my grandma would go to the 500, added my uncle, added the son-in-laws. He started backing away. My parents started backing away when they had my sister and I, but my aunt has always been going. I think she's on her 45th year or something of going to the 500 straight. We lived in Anderson, so they would always park their pop-up camper in our backyard to camp out before the 500. So that's always kind of been something in my life. And then my first real 500 experience was in 1989, listening to the race in my parents' room on the radio. And after that, I've just been hooked.
Was 89 Unser Jr. versus Fittipaldi at the end?
Yeah. Yep. That was Unser and Fittipaldi.
That's definitely a good one to get hooked on. I'll tell you that. That's man, I wish that would have been my first Indy 500. That's awesome. So yeah, that's really cool background. And what did you want to come on the show and discuss with us?
Well, I want to talk. You guys talked about Greg Moore a couple weeks ago, and I thought I've been thinking about that also. What happens if he had survived and actually raced in? Where would we be looking at? What drivers would have changed? What kind of records would have been changed? Kind of just that whole thing, where his career would have been if he had survived that crash in 1999.
All right. Why don't you lead us with this dance party? What do you think would have happened?
Well, you kind of look at it. What if he had the same kind of record that Elio had with the 3 wins? He was great on ovals. He was fearless on ovals. If you've listened to what Dario and Max and Paul Tracy have talked about him about, he would have found ways to win the 500. So he more than likely would have been a multiple-time winner. Would he have won a championship? More than likely, yes. Will we be talking about Scott Dixon being a 5-time champ? No. I could see Greg Moore winning a couple of those championships, especially like in 03, even 02, that battle that Elio had with Sam Hornish going to the end. You could see Greg Moore possibly coming out on top because Elio, again, was not a strong oval driver. And IRL at the time was all ovals. And you get that. And then we bring ourselves to Elio. If you remember right, Elio was losing his ride after that race. Hogan Racing was folding up. He did not have a ride going into the next year. Where would he have been? Would he have stayed in card as one of those Mimo Gidley type racers, Gutrasalis guys who just kind of get a ride here or there, maybe are a B driver on one of the lower level teams? Would he have gone to IndyCar and IRL? I almost see his career almost being like a Felipe Giafoni, Alex Barron, even a Bruno Giancarlo. Maybe you get a win or two in your career. You're with teams, and then as you get to the middle of the 2000s, you're just a one-off rider in the 500. Excuse me. So now you're in Brazilian racing stock cars.
I mean, it's hard to kind of disagree with your thinking on that. So just taking a wild stab at it, obviously this is all, conjecture, but let's pretend that all of this happened. How many races and how many championships do you think he would have won?
I could see his career almost like a Will Power career where he's maybe got one or two championships. He's got about the same amount of wins as Will. They were very similar in styles. You also don't see Dixon having as many championships. I think you would have seen them kind of battling each other through the decade, and where that would have been your number 1, number 2 drivers in the series. That you would have had Penske, Ganassi fighting it out, and Andretti bringing in with Dan and Tony. So you would have these 5-6 core group of drivers who week in, week out is 1, 2, 3 right across the board.
It would have been fun to watch.
I know
Oh,
the
yeah.
first thing that came to mind for me was, well, Elio probably wouldn't have 3 Indy 500s, and Greg Moore would at least have 1 or 2. So, Andy, for those who maybe are younger side of the audience here who might not know a lot about Greg Moore, what can you tell us about Greg Moore, the race car driver that you saw?
We were just scratching the surface with Greg Moore. Roger Penske, if you look at Roger Penske, he has a plan 3 to 4 steps ahead of everybody else. He's bringing in Greg Moore to be that next driver, like he did with Rick Mears, where this was a guy that's going to carry my team through the next 10 years. I believe he still holds the record for Indy Lights wins. Just smash those. Any type of circuit he was good on. But he was also a very quiet personality, very enjoyed much. Like he brought the drivers as a close-knit group, the ones who hung around him. So Max and Dario and him were very much a close-knit group. And I think you would see those 3 kind of carrying IndyCar with Dixon.
Yeah, that's awesome. So real quick, before Jess or Matt jump back in here, I was just looking at his career stats, and the one thing that jumped out to me was his last year of Indy Lights: 10 wins in 12 races, 11 podiums, 7 poles, and an average finish of 1.4, which just goes to show I don't think I've ever seen an average finish of 1.4 at any level of open wheel racing until now, and I've looked at a lot of stats before, so just thought that was pretty cool and worth mentioning real quick.
And if I remember, Lights didn't do a lot of ovals at the time, too. He was doing this all on street and road courses. His first win was Nazareth. He dominated Homestead. There's a guy, he adapted well to road course, to ovals, and he comes into IRL, which is all ovals.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't really have a question so much as just a thought that, I think your assessment's pretty spot on with the success he would have had. The IRL series, I think he would have just dominated given his abilities to succeed on ovals. And then as far as the Elio Castroneves side, fans out there know I'm not really the biggest Elio fan. And yes, I think given, ifs and what could have beens and whatnot, Elio Castroneves for sure could have just been a guy who maybe shows up at the month of May and that's it. And maybe just trying to scratch and claw to just get a part-time ride. And then, obviously with what happened, it turned into a 17 straight full-time season stint with Team Penske. And, obviously he racked up some really good stats, but I don't think Elio could hold I think if you put them on the track together in the same car, I think Greg Moore wins 9 out of 10 times against Elio. So that's really interesting. So that's kind of just where I'm at. And I really loved your segment. I think it's something that's definitely worth analysis because there's a lot going on there.
One thing I do also want to mention is but on the downside with Elio, he became the face of IndyCar. His Dancing with the Stars. If you watched any of the pre-race stuff, who was always featured? It was Elio. And then they brought in Danica. But he was that face of IndyCar. I don't know if Greg Moore would have been the face of IndyCar. His wins, his personality, of Elio's wins, his personality, the smile, the happy joyfulness really is what kind of brought IndyCar a little bit more fan support. I don't know if Greg Moore would have been the Dancing with the Stars. I don't know if he would have been that face that IndyCar would have presented out there. He didn't have those personalities at the time that fans would have, non-IndyCar, Indy 500 fans would have recognized. Elio did that because of his personality.
Wow, that's actually incredibly intriguing to think about. Very good point. I'll wrap it up with one more, just kind of a statement here. I was lucky enough to see that Greg Moore Nazareth win, and was a great performance. And this topic is really interesting. I hope someday we can sit down and look at all the stats of all the years after Greg Moore passed and kind of figure out, okay, where could he have won? And you could probably come up with a realistic number of races he won. But yeah, great topic, man. This has been a lot of fun to listen in on.
All right. Well, thank you for doing this. Thank you for letting me call in. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us, Andy. We hope to see some fan questions from you in the future, and we really appreciate all your support and hope to see you at a track.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
And up next on Fan Night, we have one of our favorite people. His name is Michael Goodyear, also known as Frenchie. So if anybody didn't catch that last week when Jess said, we have a fan question from Frenchie, he shall hence be forth known as Frenchie. So just if we say that in the future, this is the famous celebrity we got here. His Twitter handle's at mgoodyear007. Michael, you were on with us last year. We appreciate you coming on again this year. For those who don't remember, just kind of talk to us about, how you got into the sport and, any just personal facts about yourself.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to be back on again. It's always fun to get the chance to participate in your favorite weekly podcast. So thanks for having me on.
You're making me blush.
That's my specialty. So how did I get into the sport? I started out getting into Formula One, actually, and I am an old soul, so I really got into like the 70s and 80s Formula One. Pretty much scoured YouTube for all the old races that I could find that weren't like ridiculously terrible quality. And that led me to modern Formula One, but I got a little bit tired of hybrids and Lewis Hamilton winning all the time. So open wheel racing in America started to appeal to me, especially because when the Baltimore race was around, that was an event that I could actually attend and check out a race. So from then on, Indycar was the number one.
Yeah, so two thoughts about that. First, we actually just had Christian Denevsky on as our first guest, and he kind of said the same thing. Like, his family was into Formula One first and then got to IndyCar. So that's pretty cool. And then second, given that you're Frenchie, I can't let you go without asking you, if I'm having a certain type of French wine, what cheese would go best with that? Because I know Jess would appreciate this kind of insider Frenchie knowledge.
For real.
I'm just going to say Gruyere because that sounds the most French to me. And
that's just the best answer ever. Like, I couldn't have scripted that any better. That is awesome. You're just a treasure. All right. Anyways, besides French cheeses and all that stuff, what did you want to discuss in the show today?
Well, I wanted to talk about the lack of younger team owners. And specifically, I was thinking about George Steinbrenner IV as kind of an example, being that even though he's in the series, he's sort of under that Andretti umbrella now. And when he came in, I really thought he was going to be like the natural successor to be the next Roger Penske, that he was perfectly poised to be that guy because he seems so clean cut and he has this business background, at least in terms of his family. But it seems really hard for these younger team owners to get their feet. And I just am a little concerned about that with some of the team owners getting older. And we talk about the younger drivers replacing the old guard. And I think about it in terms of team owners, and I don't see that happening as naturally.
So great point. I think George Steinbrenner being under Andretti might not be a bad thing in the grand scheme of things because he's 24 now. I know he's younger than all of us. So who better to learn from than one of the best team owners? So I think in the end, he could definitely branch off and be his own team owner and be the next Roger Penske, since he's got a long career ahead of him. But it is very interesting that outside of George Steinbrenner, there aren't a whole lot of young owners that you could really look to. I'm trying to do some research, so I'll let you guys talk while I keep looking.
Do you think the lack of younger owners is due to the financial aspects of coming into the series?
That might be a good point, just considering it probably takes longer for people to accumulate the wealth necessary to do that initial investment into IndyCar. And maybe you're not going to be taking it seriously if you're a younger person who somehow made it rich, like an Instagram influencer or something who decides to dump their fortune into an IndyCar team. Maybe people are going to look at you as more flaky and not exactly trust investing with you.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it being hard. And even if you, let's say, were, born into old money or whatever, I could see it being difficult just because people still look at you as very young and maybe inexperienced, so they wouldn't want to invest in you yet either.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And One thought that I had was, I can't remember when, it was like 5 or 6 years ago. Someone pointed out on Twitter as saying, IndyCar is basically just a racing series that former drivers enter cars in. Because, we had Chip Ganassi, Roger Penske was a former driver, Jimmy Vasser, Michael Andretti, Dale Coyne. The list kind of goes on. And it wasn't really kind of like there's no like mercenary type owners out there that would just, start it up for business venture. And since then, we got Mike Harding, Ricardo Juncos, Trevor Carlin as a couple examples. So I think we have come a little bit of a ways in that area. But do you personally think that IndyCar could be doing anything more to kind of facilitate any new ownership coming to the IndyCar to start a team?
I like the story that I just heard about Roger Penske stepping in to help Elton Julian and Dragon Speed get that Chevy engine deal. So that sort of speaks to me that, yeah, we're trying to actually get new people into the series and using that connection to really do it. I guess you have to have people sort of stepping in to be able to help them and give them that helping hand in a way. But that says a lot to me about encouraging younger and newer team owners to come in and be full-time and really get things going.
I have two potential younger Road to Indy team owners that I think would be good IndyCar team owners. One who has expressed interest, one I'm not too sure of, but Michael Duncalf, who runs Exclusive Autosport. They stepped up to Indy Lights this year. I know within a couple of years he wants to be in IndyCar. I think he's in his late 30s or early 40s, so he's not George Steinbrenner young, but he's still on the younger side. And then Pabst Racing president Augie Pabst, who is the great grandson of the guy who founded Pabst Brewing Company, would be my pick because who doesn't love beer? But he is also in his late 30s or early 40s, I believe.
That would be awesome to see a Pabst sponsored IndyCar. I feel like there was one back in like the kart days, but you can't picture it. But to see Pabst on the side of a car, like PBR all over the the side of the car.
Might as well just have a water sponsor at that point.
At least the colors would look good, though.
It would look iconic, but man, surely we can do better in PBR. I guess I wouldn't complain though. I wouldn't complain at all. I still think it would be awesome, even if I have my personal differences with PBR.
Yeah, that's fair. PBR is, it's not the best thing. It's more of a college beer, but any beer sponsors that we can get, those are always cool liveries. Right. And yeah, it's just nice to see that kind of industry come back in.
Right.
But that's a whole nother topic.
So I got one here. It was about a couple of years ago. You looked at the IndyCar grid and you saw that there was about 23-ish full-time cars, but 3 teams fielded half the field in Penske, Ganassi, and Andretti Autosport. Do you have, in your head, do you have kind of like a rough idea of, what the perfect team-to-car ratio would be? Like, would you want 25 cars full-time fielded by 10 teams, 13 teams? Is there kind of a ground that IndyCar should be aiming for?
I feel like you don't necessarily need it to be like Formula One, where you can only have a maximum of 2 entries per team, because that stunts growth. But your point is good about 3 teams kind of monopolizing the grid. I feel like maybe 8 teams, 9 teams, because that's like about 3-ish cars, 2 to 3 cars per team, and that would be pretty good, pretty even. Maybe you have some 1-car teams in there, some 4-car teams, but nobody with like the 7 that we are going to see with Andretti at Indy.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how many Andretti cars there were when I was talking about that on this past week's episode. Real quick before I let Matt sign this off, the other team that I thought could be a good fit eventually would be Cape Motorsports. They've been in the Road to Indy, dominating the Road to Indy for many years. They actually just moved up from Florida to Brownsburg, so I don't know if that's the sign of bigger things to come, but would be an interesting fit. And I believe the brothers that own the team are on the younger side. I don't exactly know that one for sure.
Yeah, and I don't know how old Brian Bellardi is too, but you're making some good connections between these younger Road to Indy owners and hopefully moving up in the next few years as we transition to the next car, so that they can really get in on the beginning of investing in the new chassis.
Yeah, Belardi's a good one I didn't think about, and I'm hearing that he will be part of the Indy 500 again this year, like he was last year, as kind of an associate owner. So good things to come.
Yeah, anyone dipping their toe in is always positive to see, and as long as we don't see teams take a step back. So it's cool that Carlin is on the grid, even though we have one TVA that we're going to see at be revealed, I guess, at COTA, but at least they're in the series still, and I give my thumbs up to that.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Frenchie. Thanks so much for joining us. Michael Goodyear, everybody. Give him a follow on Twitter. Very valuable Team Pit Lane member of ours, and we really appreciate all of his insights and his chats today in our group. So, Frenchie, thanks so much for joining us, and hope to see you at a track this year. Yeah,
thank you. I hope to see you guys at a track too. I'm planning on attending several races, so let's meet up for sure.
I love it. Thanks, man. And next up on Fan Night, we have one of our good friends, Jake Neely at IndyCar Fan 25. We do give Jake a rough time for being a Marco fan, but we won't hold that against him for the next 10 minutes. Jake, how you doing? And for those who don't remember you on Fan Night last year, so thanks again for joining us, kind of describe to fans at home on how you got into racing and then maybe a fact or two about yourself.
Well, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on again, guys. I appreciate it. What got me into racing, mainly my family was huge race fans. And I don't know how when you go to a track and see these cars, you don't just fall in love with it. So, went to Indy 500s. We used to go to Michigan when it was the 500 up there, and just went to races and fell in love with it and became the fan I am now. A couple facts about me. Huge Marco fan, as everyone should know. And I was a Michael fan before Marco fan, so I guess it kind of plays into it. Just got to stay within the family, so I'm kind of stuck.
Yeah, so what did you want to discuss on the show today?
Well, the aeroscreens obviously a big topic of discussion coming into the season. I know a lot of it's been like the cooling and things. But listen to the Santino Ferrucci interview. He talks about the raceability and the effect it might have on the aero, and adding more weight to the top of the car means the car wants to roll more. So I wanted to discuss the effects that it might have on the racing more from a positive aspect, which might surprise some people because, I'm not going to be negative.
Are you feeling okay?
Yeah. Well, I might be a little sick, but...
I don't know what to do right now because this is not normal.
I am not always negative.
That's true. I can go in with the first question here. So, obviously we have a super important test Tuesday and Wednesday next week. And so by the time fans are listening to this, the test will have already been concluded. But are you kind of surprised that more teams aren't taking a Team Penske approach, which is, they're entering Scott McLaughlin, obviously get him familiar with the car, but also as an extra set of data to use. Are you surprised like a Team Coin didn't, field a third car for an Oriole Servia type or whoever just to acquire more data?
Well, I think in a perfect world, it would be fantastic for everyone to go out with multiple cars. But I think the money aspect of things definitely keeps it down, especially when we're it's not going to be a huge discussion point since they've shown that all the teams will have the aero screen come the test. But it was a discussion point that all the teams might not have the aero screen by the test, and it costs money to get out there. We see Ryan Reinbold's not showing up, obviously to save money. Even though they're going to participate at St. Pete, they don't have any testing on a street course other than Sebring, so it just comes down to a money aspect. I'm sure every team would love to put 5 or 6 cars out there, but it's just not feasible.
All right, Jake, since you're in a positive mood, what is your big prediction for aero screen racing in terms of raceability? Are we going to see more passes? Are the tires going to handle better than some people are expecting? What's your big, bold prediction?
I think that I'll focus more on Indianapolis because that's where maybe the racing hasn't been the best. I think we've seen pretty good racing on road and street courses lately. So I don't know how those will be affected. I think the added weight will definitely test Firestone and what they're able to do with their tires. They're obviously going to have to do different compounds and maybe play with air pressures so the tires don't just fall off completely. But I think at Indianapolis, which was what Ferrucci touched on in the interview, was it's going to create a bigger air hole for the car following. Kind of like what we saw with the aero kits, essentially, is it's going to punch a bigger hole, which is going to cause a bigger draft. In years past, when you've gotten into the draft, there hasn't been enough air going over the front wing, create enough downforce, so the cars would push a lot. I think with the added weight to the top of the car with the aero screen, we're going to see the car want to roll more, which doesn't physically roll over, but it's going to want to turn more, because if you start the inertia towards the turn, then that added weight on top the car is going to want to continue to the left. So I don't think the push that we've seen in the cars the last few years is going to create such as big an issue as what we've seen with the front wing creating a lack of downforce.
So we talked about it recently in an episode. Just want to get your opinion. Do you think with the aero screen and everything that's going to happen with it, that it's still going to be, the normal Penske, Ganassi, Andretti up front, or do you think it's going to allow some smaller teams to kind of bridge the gap?
I think it's going to allow the possibility of some smaller teams if they hit the setup. It's not a complete reset like we saw when we went from the DW12 to the Aero Kit, back to the Universal Aero Kit, where it's pretty much a complete reset. I think a lot of setups are going to stay relatively the same. You're just going to have to move some of the COP around, which is the center of pressure in the car. So you either have to have more up front or more in the back to make sure the car's handling correctly. And I think if we see a smaller team hit that, you could see some better things, but it's still mainly going to come down to the team's investment in dippers in the shock program. The side of things isn't changing since we haven't changed the overall aero of the car. Just added a lot of weight and another air deflection device, essentially. It's causing disturbance.
So kind of want to get your take and take a step back here. As far as the aero screen as a whole, where do you weigh in on traditionalism versus evolving the safety of the sport?
Oh, man, you had me positive there for a little bit.
I'm testing
obviously, yeah, from a traditionalist standpoint, I'm going to miss the open cockpit. I'm a traditionalist. I'm going to miss that part of it. And from the front of the car, honestly, the aero screen looks terrible. From the side, it doesn't look as bad. It kind of looks cool, like a fighter jet. But we cannot continue having driver injuries, and if there's something we can do to alleviate that, then I'm 100% behind it. We're not running front engine roadsters anymore on dirt.
Did you
much
tell Rob
to some
Miller
people's
that?
chagrin. I'm not going to name drop anybody. But we've evolutionized things. There's been things in the past that I'm sure people are like, oh, we can't do that and things like that. So I'm interested to see where the future goes. I would have been more interested to see just the aero screen itself, not the halo integrated into it, because I think that was a much cooler looking design, but obviously structurally something must not have worked there. So we got what we got. We're going to keep evolving this, obviously. We're never where we're at. So I'm excited to see where the future of IndyCar goes with safety. I tried to keep that positive.
Yeah, well done. So on the sort of like what Matt asked, we've seen some cars on the aero screen at the top have some sponsorship logos. We saw Pagano have his name up there, which looked kind of cool. What do you think? More sponsorship or a place for the driver name?
I think if you've got a sponsor that wants to throw their name up there and give you some money, you should go for it. But I do kind of miss where we used to be when we had the huge rear wings where you'd put the name on there, because not everyone can just identify that's the Dayglow yellow for, Pagano or and things like that. So putting the driver's name out there definitely makes sense. I think for teams that are a little bit smaller, that are scraping for every dime that they can, maybe finding a sponsor with a couple $1,000s to throw up there is better. But I don't think Team Penske is really scraping by. So it makes sense for them to put their names up there to get more driver recognition. And so you can, in the middle of a race, because not everyone watches on TV. I don't know where the LEDs are at this year. So it's, the numbers are nearly impossible to see when you're on a oval. So just to give some identification, at speeds of 200 and some miles an hour that they're going to be running.
Okay, so I am just curious because you went a little negative, but you didn't go too bad, so good job. But you're saying it's not aesthetically pleasing currently. Do you think with the new chassis that's going to change? Do you think it's going to just look better and blend into the car more, or do you think it's still going to be an eyesore?
I hope they can blend it in more. But I think we need to, while we want it to look super cool and all this, how many direct angles from the top front do we get to see if you're either at a race or watching on TV? A lot of them aren't from that angle. There's been a lot of pictures shown like that just to kind of show the way it looks. So I'm not sure, and I'm not sure at how speed it's going to look either. At speed, maybe it just looks fantastic and the bulkiness from the front won't matter. But I'm definitely hoping that the front of the car looks better on the.
Yeah, for sure.
Fair enough.
So we just wanted to say thanks for coming on. It was a great topic. We hope to see you at a track this year. I'm pretty sure we're going to see you a bunch in May. And we appreciate you listening every week and being a Team Pit Lane member. So we appreciate everything you do and hope to see you around this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be out there as much as I can in May, and I'm hoping to get to some other races and find some Good Luck Marco underwear to put on my head. And
oh, yeah, I was going to
else
ask you
I can
about
put
that.
it
Did
on.
you get any lucky underwear yet? Or
I searched eBay and Amazon, and all I could find was a tape of Marco's highlights, which are about 35 seconds. So I think I need to become a video editor and start putting together some of Marco's best moves. And then we might find something here. Maybe I'll have to design my own underwear and put it on the Pit Lane Parley site, and people can buy it, and we can get Marco a race win.
you say some of Marco's best moves. Do they have YouTube videos from like 8-9 years ago on YouTube?
Yeah, I was watching some stuff the other day from 06 and 2009. He used to use the high line really well at Texas, and then now he just uses the low line to let everyone pass him. But I still love Marco, still my favorite driver. We just got to get going here because it's getting real hard to defend him sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, nobody can ever accuse you of being a bandwagon fan, I guess. So we'll give you credit on that. That is
correct.
So,
Thank
all
you.
right, well, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you at a track this year. All right, and last but certainly not least, we are fortunate to have Caleb from his Twitter handle at Indycar Podcast. Another good podcast. If you guys are looking to check one out, they do some good stuff over there. So, Caleb, thanks so much for joining us. And for fans at home who don't know you, kind of describe how you got into racing.
Well, yeah, first off, thanks for having me. I grew up in Indianapolis, so it's just kind of always been there. I remember going to the track as a little kid on field trips and going to practice and qualifying, and I had to wait a little while for my first race day, but just kind of something that's there. I don't really know how it first clicked for me because I remember being afraid they were so loud back in the day when I was a little kid, but here I am and just love following the sport, meeting people who love the sport, and talking about the sport any chance I can get.
That was also a fear I had as a kid, so don't worry about that. That's something I was in the same boat too. All right, so what's the topic you brought on the show that you would like to discuss with us?
Well, probably one of our favorite topics on our podcast, New Track Record, AJ Foyt Racing. I just want to say, before I get into all this, we both wish them ultimate success because I think their success would be phenomenal for the series, not only just for the team, but for fans. I mean, I think everyone wants to see that team be successful and win races, on a year in, year out basis. But with the way things are going over the past couple of years, it just seems like they're barely hanging on being in the sport. We saw how they had a consistent driver lineup last year. Unfortunately, actually bringing guys back didn't really lead to results, with Kanan 15th overall, Lace 19th, last among full-time guys who did every single race. But then this year they're taking a different approach, and on paper, everything sounds good. It looks good. But with having multiple guys sharing a seat gives me a lot of concern for what they can ultimately do. Kimball full-time in one seat, I think that's a good move. That's probably the best option they had available out there, taking a guy who has a good amount of funding, but also has a lot of technical knowledge, is well experienced as a race winner, can bring something to that team. It's the other seat, the 14 seat, that I'm very concerned about. They're sharing it amongst Bourdais, Dalton Kellett, Tony Kanaan. We saw last year with Carlin what happened in year 2 for their team, and they switched from having Chilton and Kimball full-time back in 2018. They started to get some momentum toward the end of that year. 2019, however, different story. You had 6 different guys share 2 cars. There was never really any consistency, and unfortunately for them, the 500 was also a disaster with only Kimball qualifying, Pato Ward, Max Chilton sitting out on that one, not qualifying. So it just seems like Foyt is kind of going down that similar road of, plugging the holes to make it necessary to run 2 cars full time throughout the season. But is it really going to be in the best option for Foyt throughout the year? And yeah, I get you have to pay bills and you have to make sure your team's going to be on the grid. But just the lack of consistency in the 14 car, I think, concerns me that this could be kind of another repeat of Carlin from last year coming in for Foyt this year.
Do you think, though, that with the way they're doing the 14 car, that maybe they're just trying to gain some knowledge for 2021, not necessarily too worried about this year since they're kind of wanting to rebuild everything?
I think if you're wanting to rebuild everything, I think you want to start sooner rather than later and kind of I feel like they're putting off the inevitable here. Kanaan's on his way out. I get doing the oval race package, but it just seems like they tried to fill these gaps as opposed to looking for the best options out there. I think with Foyt, it kind of feels like they're stuck in this transition phase, like, just every single year where they have people who come in, whether it's a younger guy or experienced guy, they get, new engineering, they get new crew guys, they get some new management guys. They say all the right things. Season comes along, and unfortunately, they're stuck in the back outside of a race or two. And it just seems like until they make wholesale changes with the team and with the driver lineup, that's consistent, mind you, because I don't feel like this is very consistent for next year. They're not going to see the results that they expect, that fans want to see, and that I think the drivers want to see as well.
So out of curiosity, we've talked about the 14 car quite a bit and their driver selections. Bourdais, I think, can bring some value to the team. Dalton Kellett, I'm sure, will be hotly debated all season, to put it politically correct. If you were going to, if you were Larry Foyt or whoever got to pick that seat, and let's pretend money's not an issue here, but you're picking from a young driver's perspective, who from Indy Lights that wasn't already signed, let's say, I don't know, what was the Kellett news a week and a half ago at this point, who would you have wanted to see in that car?
From Indy Lights, I mean, a guy who has been deserving of an IndyCar chance for a while and is definitely qualified. I mean, it's Santi Urrutia. He's the guy who, I think I was surprised that he's back on the radar and participating in Indy Lights full time. I almost wonder if that would be better served just, going for an Indy 500 ride and seeing what happens with it, because that guy is more than deserving of an opportunity. And we all know, just like how it is for most guys, it just comes down to funding.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. And my question I got for you now is, I feel like maybe I was a little harsh on Dalton Kellett with my assessment of him a couple episodes ago on our podcast. And I know a couple other people out there kind of share that viewpoint that I have. So I just wanted to get where you are at with your assessment of Dalton Kellett jumping up into IndyCar.
To put it nicely, I think it's a stretch. I think it's obvious that he does bring a solid amount of money and he's able to keep that car on the grid because of the funding. But I found it interesting that, he's getting the 500 ride, but it seems that ABC Supply is covering the 4 and 14 car for the 500. So that's not an issue. You would think he'd have, with the money he's bringing that includes the 500, that he would have enough to basically do that car outside the ovals. But the fact that they brought in Bourdais kind of shows you their trepidation with him doing all the rest of the races and the 500, like we're seeing with some other guys like Connor Daly. And I think that, yes, he's experienced in lights, but the results don't really give you anything to suggest that he's going to be a, guy who can turn it around for them. The quotes in the press release from Foyt were interesting, to say the least, and how Larry Foyt kind of worded the move. I hope he's successful, but I think he's kind of put himself, not really by his choice, but he's just kind of in a position where he's set up to fail.
I think that's a fair point here. So I'll wrap it up with one last question from myself. And if anybody else wants to chime in afterwards, go ahead. Tony Kanaan is racing the 5 ovals this year. Do we see Kanaan at least having a podium result in one of those final 5 races? Maybe he gets some energy reinvigorated in him now that he's not doing all the races and he can spend some extra time preparing. And more than just I don't want to call it a lucky podium in Gateway, since the strategy did work to his favor, but more than just something on strategy.
I'm going to say no, because when you're not in the car every single race, he said it himself, Elio's said it, when you're just doing like a race or a handful of races, it's really tough to be in that groove. Maybe not so much on the driving side, because an oval, Tony Kanaan's a great oval driver. I think no one's going to disagree with that. But I think as far as those rhythm things, whether it's, pit stops or practice or, just working yourself back from, maybe a small mistake that costs you a position or two. Those are the little things that if you're racing full time, you're kind of in that, you're locked in. And I think that will kind of be the reason that he's not going to find himself on the podium. I think, top 10s possible, top 5s definitely. But I think it'll be a tough ask for him to get a podium or go to victory lane this season.
Fair point.
Well, that's great analysis there and a great segment. So we really appreciate you bringing that on the show here. To all the fans listening at home, thanks for listening to our 2nd annual fan night. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Should be a good time. We got a lot of good IndyCar stuff going on right now in the world, so that's awesome. And hope you enjoyed the fan night. Caleb, keep up the great work on the podcast. Thanks so much for taking time to join us today. And we hope to see you at a track near you soon.
All right. Thanks for having me on and getting ready for St. Pete.
No worries. Thanks so much for joining us. And Jess, if you want to go ahead and sign off the show.
And guys, keep your lug nuts tight.